limerence as a gateway to stop obsessing after a breakup. In this video, we're going to talk about the 5 limerent fantasies that people typically experience after a breakup that are actually a gateway to stop post-breakup obsession. And the reason I say they're a gateway is because our obsessions or fantasies often hold hidden clues about the lesson we need to learn about this relationship or about this person to move on. And this is really good news because while you think your brain is running in circles going nowhere, it's actually circling around something deeper hidden within the fantasy. And when you recognize this, will actually free up more of your emotional bandwidth and create peace of mind. In this video, we'll cover the following. So we're gonna quickly define limerence. We're gonna talk about how limerence can act as a gateway to stop obsession. We're also gonna talk about the dark and the light side of limerence, and then we'll get into the 5 limerent fantasies. Hi, I'm Katya Morozova, and I help people recover from their breakups and become secure in their relationships. I do this with the wisdom of attachment theory. If that sounds interesting to you, then definitely subscribe to my channel. I'm also the founder of katyamorozova.me, and if you'd like to work with me, you can one-on-one, you can book a coaching session on that website. Finally, I just want to mention that I'm hiring for a content development assistant. If you'd like to hear more about this opportunity, definitely stick around to the very end of this video. All right, let's quickly dive in and define limerence. It's a term Dr. Dorothy Tenoff came up with to describe this intense romantic attraction thing. Like when you're really into someone and not quite like a regular crush. Tenoff describes it more like when you can't get that person out of your head and you somewhat idealize them. And Tenoff calls them, the idealized one, this limerent object. And your emotions are a bit all over the place, from very high highs to low lows. But here's the twist. It's not necessarily what we'd call deep and lasting love. Limerence is more like a temporary and sometimes one-sided experience that can throw your emotions for a loop. And the interesting part is much of what we experience when we're limerent is actually in our minds. Tenoff talks about it as mental activity. It's our interpretation of what's happening rather than what's happening itself. Now let's talk about how limerence acts as a gateway to stop obsession. So in some psychological models, when you're all caught up in obsessive behavior or thoughts, they see that as the main problem to fix. But from an attachment perspective or a trauma-informed perspective, obsession is like a signal or symptom itself. Think of obsession as what's going on in your mind, the way your brain behaves. And then there's this thing called limerence, which is like a specific kind of obsession. And it's all about a specific person or relationship. So figuring out limerence and what daydreams come with it can actually tell you a lot about what's going on underneath. We might think these daydreams are just random, but when they stick around and keep happening and they're pretty repetitive, it's like your inner self is trying to tell you something. Getting what that message is can really help calm down those obsessive thoughts. Now let's dissect limerent thinking into 2 aspects to help you understand where you stand on the limerence scale. So this is going to help you to identify the specific type of limerence you're experiencing and it's going to make it easier to delve into the core of your obsession and find solutions. So we'll refer to these aspects as the light and the dark side of obsessive thinking. The light side involves fantasizing, thinking about reuniting, receiving affection in return, or finding some kind of redemption. On the other hand, and those are just a few examples, on the other hand, the dark side encompasses intrusive thoughts, persistent rumination, intense anxiety, masked shame, which is often masked by continuous rumination, a lot of cyclical thoughts, and this urge to solve problems or find solutions. Now let's get into the 5 limerent fantasies and the hidden information that could be a clue to your healing and to what your inner self might be telling you that you need to support yourself in your healing process. I call this limerent fantasy the Grand Overhaul. This is when you're limerent about making it work with this person. So you imagine saying the perfect thing or taking the perfect action that will get them to come back to you. And you imagine that they finally accept your solutions and say, okay, let's give it a try. Or maybe you recall that they told you that they would work on themselves or that they're going to go to therapy. And you imagine them going to therapy and getting their stuff figured out, only to come back to you. This limerent fantasy is all about coping with feelings of disappointment. So think about it this way. Why do we try to fix things? Well, we fix things because we're struggling to cope with the way that they actually are. Because the reality of who they are right now or how the relationship is right now is really difficult to come to terms with. If we wish they would go to therapy and work on themselves, there's usually an end result in there somewhere. If they go to therapy, then they will change. And if they change, and let's say we insert here the thing you really need them to change or really need to see about themselves, then they will become the person you really want them to be, or at least fix the problem that you see about them, and then you can have the relationship that you really want with them. When we fantasize about these grand overhauls about a relationship, what we're really struggling with is coping with the feelings of disappointment of who this person is right now. And of course, this doesn't negate the things you genuinely love about this person or the wonderful things about them or the wonderful aspects about your relationship. It's just that it's hard to include in our psyche the disappointing parts of the person who we're limerent or infatuated with. So that's the nature of limerence, because when we're limerent, we're not really seeing the person in all of their entirety or the relationship in all of its entirety. We're seeing the things we want to see, the idealized version. In this limerent fantasy, the quality is often something like fantasizing about your ex coming back to you. Or maybe you often find yourself checking your phone to see if they've reached out, or feeling disappointed when you get a text and it's not from them. This limerent fantasy is usually a gateway to our wish to feel hopeful, and probably a sign that you're struggling to cope with feelings of loss and feelings of hopelessness. Hopelessness is an especially tough emotion for people in general to cope with. Maybe you think that if you allow yourself to feel hopeless, you'll fall into a deep, endless abyss. Or maybe you have fallen into an abyss at another point in your life when you experienced great loss or great hardship, and you really don't want to go there again. So for humans, I believe that hopelessness is about the toughest emotion that a person can feel. We need to feel hopeful to thrive as humans. We need to hope and to continue to push on. Yet it's also true that sometimes we do feel hopeless. Sometimes a situation has no way through. Sometimes we've done everything that we can, and the only thing that we can really face is the reality that something beautiful didn't work out the way that we hoped it would. And accepting that doesn't mean that you're accepting some kind of ultimate undesirable fate for your life and for your future. It doesn't mean that you won't feel hopeful again. It might not be about this situation, about this relationship, but remember that to hope is a human right. I remember when I went through a breakup in college and had this days upon weeks of depression and nothingness and just getting through the daily slog. And one day I arrived at school and I parked my car and I started making my usual trek to class when I suddenly noticed that I was humming to myself, and I caught myself feeling joyful and just enjoying the moment. And I still remember that moment. It surprised me and it made me feel hopeful even without a certain future with this person that I lost. My hope had nothing to do with the actual breakup. I was just hopeful for what laid ahead. And I don't mean to get mushy on you guys, but I really believe that that moment is really available to everyone. When you find solace in fantasies of someone gently comforting you, wiping your tears away, or assuring you that everything will be all right, this limerent fantasy reveals an underlying need for comfort or reassurance. And of course, we all have a need to feel comfort and the need to be comforted from time to time. When this need shapeshifts into a repetitive fantasy, something a little deeper is usually at play. Why do we fantasize about receiving comfort? Often, history can be a great insight into this particular need. If we grew up in an environment where support like that was scarce or non-existent, perhaps due to a lack of available care during really vulnerable moments, growing up in an environment lacking comfort can make self-comforting challenging in adulthood, and especially amidst a lot of overwhelming emotions. Limerent fantasies about receiving comfort can then serve as an indirect avenue to connect to that sometimes forgotten or suppressed need, and can be a clue that there's growth for you in learning how to comfort yourself. Do you fantasize about your ex coming back and giving you the answers you so desperately crave? Or maybe you have fantasies of redemption where your ex takes responsibility for their stuff. Do you find yourself obsessing over things you said or did? Do you feel certain that if you had only played things differently with your ex, that if you were more patient, more this, less that, you wouldn't be where you are right now? This pattern often signifies that there is toxic shame beneath the limerent fantasy. This is that shadow side of limerence we were talking about earlier. Breakups can induce a lot of shame. This type of shame often points to the unfairness with which we treat ourselves. I find with the people that I work with that they can easily and quickly give the other person credit, a pardon, or rationalize their behavior in one way or another. And I hear often, oh, but that's just their attachment style, their wound. And yet, we don't give ourselves that same kind of leeway, don't give ourselves that same amount of credit. This part of limerence, this darker side of limerence, can actually be a gateway to recognize how we actually put ourselves beneath our partners or elevate our partners high above us, whichever way you want to slice it. And this gateway offers us the opportunity to investigate further. Why do we place an unequal amount of responsibility on ourselves? Why are we so quick to give compassion to our partner, but offer so little compassion to us? This gateway is all about recognizing the way we are unusually harsh with ourselves, the pockets of harshness that haven't yet been investigated. I'm curious, do you recognize yourself in any of these limerent fantasies? Let me know which one resonated or which ones in the comments below. If you resonated with some of the limerent fantasies that we talked about and you're now really curious and eager to maybe navigate through them, if you notice that post-breakup limerence seems like a roadblock to your healing process, or if you're realizing that limerence plays a bigger role overall in your romantic relationships than you initially thought, and you're really keen on unraveling those threads of limerence so that you can build capacity to hold some of these emotions that we talked about and connect to these core lessons and core needs that will ultimately support you and not just healing, but actually empower you to be secure in your future relationships. And if you'd really like to put an end to the constant replay of what happened in your last relationship so you can finally have some peace of mind, and maybe you're also curious about how limerence connects with your attachment style and how it'll guide you towards a path of secure attachment. If that's the case, then I invite you to explore one-on-one coaching with me. Attachment coaching is really effective in supporting you to reshape your attachment system and to really pave the way to have secure and enduring relationships. And this style of attachment work combines attachment theory, neuroscience, and trauma-informed therapy to gently yet effectively support you in your transformation. If you're thinking to yourself, yes, I need that. And of course, if my voice resonates with you, then you can start by booking a one-on-one session on my website. You can do so in the link in the comments or in the description, or you can go to my website, katyamorozova.me/single-session. An initial session is a really great way for us to get to know each other and for you to get a sense of how I work. And from there, you and I can explore a longer-term coaching relationship if it feels right for both of us. I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I'm hiring a content development assistant. And if you've been subscribed to my channel for some time, or even if you're new to my channel, if you think it would be fun to work together, if you're a creative person, if you're an organized person, if you ask really good questions, then you might be perfect for this position. This is going to be a part-time position, like very part-time initially, and I'm hoping that it will grow into a larger position over time. So keep that in mind. If you're even curious about it, I'm going to put a link in the pinned comment where you can apply for that position, where you can learn how to apply. And yeah, I'm really excited and I hope to hear from you.